Good afternoon to you. Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com, here with your Hurricane Outlook and discussion for Friday, July the 8th, 2016. Quick stop from the National Hurricane Center's homepage. Nothing, of course, in the Atlantic Basin over the next 48 hours, and that holds true for the next 120 hours, out to 5 days. In the eastern North Pacific, in addition to the two active systems we have, Bloss and Celia, we have another area, surprise, surprise, trying to develop out here down south of the mainland part of Mexico, southwest of southwest Mexico over the eastern Pacific, but they only give it about a 30% chance of developing over the next 5 days. So that's interesting. Maybe this area is getting ready to sort of calm down again after having a pretty active burst here as of late. So here's what's going on with the current conditions out there with what we do have. Hurricane Bloss still headed out, no issues for land. Tropical Storm Celia forecast to become a hurricane as well. It too will stay away from Mexico. So all of these developments have, boosted what we call the ACE index for this region, the accumulated cyclone energy. But high pressure in the mid-levels of the atmosphere, deep layer high pressure, all in all, steering everything away from the Mexican coastline, which you can see up here in the right-hand corner of the map. So no issues there and no issues in the Atlantic for land areas. So let's take a look at some climatology real quick. I thought I would mention this. I talked about it in my blog today, but on the video I can outline more and discuss more. Picture and narration is worth 10,000 words. Let's look at it that way. You can only write so much in a blog, not writing a novel there. So let's go over this. So this is the climatological spread, if you will, over the past 100 years, showing everything from around mid-May to almost the end of the year, and the graphic showing you the statistical distribution of tropical storms and hurricanes. And clearly, and most of you probably already know this, the peak is around mid-September, September 10th or so, and you usually don't have much activity on the front side and not much activity on the backside as we get in towards the fall and winter months, obviously. And then you have this really marked peak, a very steep rise in activity after about the first part of August. So today, we're sitting at roughly this line right here, July 8th, 9th, 10th, something like that. Just round it up and call it July 10th. And you can see, there's a few peaks and valleys in here of statistical burst of activity over the past 100 years, but all in all, it's generally pretty flat this time of year. So it's supposed to be quiet where we are and where we're headed. Of course, things traditionally would get busier, with that first peak being around September the 10th, a secondary peak later in October, around October the 15th or so, and then again in early November. So look, early November is generally more busy, statistically speaking, than this time of year. Tried to draw a straight line, and it's supposed to be quiet this part of the year. I've just been reading around on some of the blogs and message boards and some social media posts about, where are all these hurricanes that are supposed to form this year? And it's not so much people complaining that there's no hurricanes. They want to be able to believe the forecasts that are put out by the different agencies that do so now. And so people are just kind of wondering. And when you consider that we can look at data such as sea surface temperature anomalies and pressure tendencies and model runs pretty much every day, and in some cases 4 to 6, 2, 4, 6 times a day, whatever, depending on the model. You get the Euro twice a day, the GFS 4 times a day. It's like watching a pot trying to boil, and I understand that. So we have a long way to go before the peak of the season begins to creep into the picture. All right? So looking at the anomalies, this is updated twice a week. I wanted to show you this because there are some differences between this year and last year that are pretty obvious, but I thought I'd point them out again. So this is the updated map from yesterday. Clearly the cold signal showing up in the Pacific. It's not as much as maybe some people thought it would be by now, although, this is pretty substantial in here. You still have this warm PDO, the Pacific Decadal Oscillation, where the Pacific Ocean as a whole is warmer. The background state is, and so this is trying to fight that. It's kind of like trying to pour a gallon of cold water into an Olympic-sized pool where the rest of the water is 90 degrees or something. Okay, that's the best analogy I can come up with. And so this is, struggling a little bit, but the background state of the pressure pattern, the SOI, is positive right now, and basically that just means that overall the net flow of air in the tropical Pacific is from east to west. Pressures are generally lower in the western Pacific than they are in the eastern Pacific, and so this should continue to evolve. Meanwhile, the Atlantic Basin, we have warm temperatures relative to average here in the deep tropics. All of the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico is substantially warmer than it should be overall, and a little bit warmer than the eastern Pacific is. So that could be interesting later on. So this is what it looked like last year at this time. I mean, come on. To say that this season's going to be like the last few, well, sea surface temperature-wise, it certainly isn't. We have this incredible stark difference. Very cold in the MDR, the Caribbean, and the Gulf, and then very, very warm as this monster La Nina, whoops, Freudian slip there, maybe a La Nina coming. This big El Nino from last year, we won't even call it a monster. I kind of try to shy away from adjectives like that. Not scientifically descriptive to call something monster, but it was a significant El Nino. That's a better way to classify it. And you can see, too, that the general base state of the Pacific last year was very warm, and this year it's moderated somewhat, definitely. And the Atlantic has warmed, and the Gulf is certainly warmer. So we'd have quite a difference between this year and last year just looking at sea surface temperatures. Now, a lot has also been said on social media with sort of this undertone of, well, no hurricanes as long as there's this. Well, that's absolutely true. This is the Saharan air layer, and it is quite prominent right now. These large outbreaks of subtropical high pressure with this low-level jet that comes through and rolls this stuff off. Very warm air, no moisture to speak of, lots of dust and suspended particulate matter in here, and this comes out over the Atlantic, and it's typical. I mean, Africa and the Saharan desert is enormous, and it's a big part of Earth's overall climate engine, and this is one of the pieces of that engine. And if we didn't have this, if everything was just lush and tropical and rainy up through here, we would have more hurricanes that you could possibly ever deal with in the Atlantic, because these tropical waves would come off just completely unabated and loaded for bear all the time. I mean, look at Taiwan, 25 or so major hurricane type, well, they're called typhoons there, over the past, I think, 50 years or something like that. And, they are in a shooting gallery out there in the open Pacific, where you don't have the Saharan air layer. So thank goodness for that, that we have this in the Atlantic. And so this will change over time, and the pressures will slowly start to lower down across this region, and the Saharan air will come off farther north, and these tropical waves, which are almost none right now to speak of, at least convectively active, will become more robust. I say they will. They should, climatologically speaking. That doesn't mean it has to. Just because something should happen doesn't mean that it will happen. So always keep that in mind as well. But basically this is following the climatological norm. Now, why has the Pacific become so busy all of a sudden? Well, part of it is this convectively coupled Kelvin wave that came through, sort of a piece of the Madden-Julian oscillation, all just fancy ways of stating the obvious here, that conditions became more favorable, there was more moisture, an increase in convection and energy and vorticity. All of those things came together. Basically, the ingredients for, quite the wedding cake, if you will, all came together and got baked in the oven. And so there you go. You have got these hurricanes and tropical storms that have formed in the eastern Pacific. So that analogy works really well. You got all those ingredients, and you can have them separate, but until you put them together, nothing's going to happen. And we saw that happen with warm sea surface temperatures around this area. By the way, this is Mexico right here. Hawaii would be sitting out here. And so what are we looking at? Well, this is the 700 millibar humidity, the moisture in the atmosphere. And you see all this green and dark green through here. Lots of moisture available. This is the equator down here. And you can see that north of the equator, up to about, what is this? If they would paint this is minus 20. This is probably 20. There it is, 20 degrees latitude. Very moist. And that has led to these developments. Now, if we look at the Atlantic Basin at the same latitude and longitude, there is the equator. There's 20 degrees north latitude. And there is really not much moisture at all. It's very pinched off and very narrow down in the intertropical convergence zone. And you can see the influence of the Saharan air dipping in. I mean, this is really remarkable when the model can show you what's really happening in reality. So very dry across the Atlantic right now in the mid-levels of the atmosphere. And you contrast that to the very moist mid-levels of the atmosphere, about the 700 millibar level. Yeah, there you go. I mean, this is the spark that set off all of those storms. We had Agatha, Blas, and now Celia developing. And in the Atlantic Basin, nothing but stable, dry air. And you'll see, I'll show this map again in a couple of weeks. All of this will start to lift more north with time. These tropical waves will come off with more moisture, and we will begin the process of heading towards this part right here. And you better be ready for it, because the indications are still there that this will be a busy season, especially compared to the last few. Doesn't have to be that way, but it looks like it could be that way. That's the best way I can put it. All right? So a great weekend ahead, especially if you like heat in parts of the south and southeast, pretty much everywhere. And if you don't like heat, well, stay inside, stay cool. And if you can get to the beach, do so, and do so safely, and all things related to that. All right? And, that's the other thing. When we have this much heat over the North American continent, typically when that breaks later in August, then the hurricanes show up. The balance begins to shift. But I'm rambling on and on. It's time to roll things up and have a good weekend. All right? You do the same. I am Mark Sudduth for HurricaneTrack.com. As always, thanks for tuning in. I appreciate your time and attention. Hopefully you learned something today. Have a great weekend out there, and I'll be back with you again on Monday.